Welcome, everybody. My name is Marshall Jones. I'm a security specialist solutions architect at AWS. Focus my time on the threat detection and incident response domain and helping AWS customers secure their AWS environments with AWS native security services. Welcome today to the integration, prioritization, and response with Security Hub workshop. As we go through this, I'm going to give a quick overview of AWS Security Hub and how it fits into the overall AWS native security services, and then dive into the workshop where I'm going to work through the workshop on my screen, sharing my screen the whole time. And that way, if you'd like to follow along, you're able to follow along or kind of go through this guide yourself. We're going to provide some instructions on how you can use the accounts that we provisioned for you all. And then you'll be able to use that account as we go through this workshop. So without any further ado, we'll get started. So as far as Security Hub is concerned, there's really two main benefits to AWS Security Hub that customers use on a daily basis, right? The first one is being the ability to integrate with other AWS native security services, as well as partner services to continually aggregate and prioritize findings across the different security services that you might be using in your environment, like GuardDuty and Macie and Inspector. There's also the ability to provide automated security checks that align to different standards. For example, using the AWS Security Foundational Security Best Practices, which is a curated list of security checks that AWS has put forth to give you a benchmark of secure configurations that we recommend you have in your environment. And then more importantly, with those two use cases, being able to take action, right? It's important to be able to find security misconfigurations or security findings in the environment, but to take action from there, whether that be automated or manual action from there. So how does that workflow work a little bit more? So Security Hub can consume these findings from AWS security services and partner services, as well as other services like Trusted Advisor and Config. It has integration with Amazon Detective to kick off findings based on potentially GuardDuty findings that were ingested in a Security Hub, kick off those investigations for root cause analysis. It also integrates with Audit Manager and Event Bridge, where you can do things like prep for audits and collect that evidence that you might need for an audit. And then also Event Bridge, where it has integrations with AWS Lambda and step functions to build out automated response to any findings that you might be consuming into Security Hub, or potentially forwarding on to some sort of SIM solution, or maybe a Slack or a ticketing system to alert the appropriate resources that need to take care of a certain finding that you've ingested in the Security Hub. So moving on from there, AWS Security Hub, the findings that it ingests automatically send events to Event Bridge, where you can then create rules and then specify specific targets. So like I said, whether that be Lambda, Systems Manager, where you can either run commands or Patch Manager based on certain findings that you have in the environment. Or that being a partner solution where you're integrating directly with your ticketing system and assigning these directly to the teams responsible for fixing, say, for example, some sort of security misconfiguration that Security Hub has identified through those foundational security best practices checks. Or potentially custom-built solutions for something that's custom in your environment that's needed to be resolved automatically. So that's our brief overview on Security Hub. I know everybody probably wants to move on to the workshop, so we'll jump from here into some workshop details. What we're going to go over in this workshop at a very high level is we're going to get you familiar with Security Hub, and then we'll jump into building out some things that are common in Security Hub. So creating custom insights, which is the ability to filter and visualize findings in the environment. And then custom actions and remediation. The environment we've built out has some pre-built Lambda functions that we're going to look at and then use for automatic remediation, as well as the fourth module that we're going to do some finding enrichment and notification through posting Security Hub findings into Slack. So what we'll need for this is to follow the workshop guide, which is going to be at this link that we'll post in the chat. And then to get access to the AWS account that you have access to use, you'll need to go to the dashboard.eventengine.run link that we have here as well. And then put in the event hash. And then we'll be able to open the console. You're able to use the one-time password option that you'll see through going through the Event Engine console. So like I said, I'm going to run through this on my screen as well too. So I'll go ahead. I'll leave this up for roughly 30 seconds or so. The moderators will be posting this in the chat as well. So you don't need to copy this down over the screen. And then I'll pull my browser up and we'll go ahead and get started. I will go, like I said, right along with you all on this. So you'll see me pulling up the event engine where we need to put in our hash. So I will paste this hash in. I'll accept the terms and log in. Others will use the email one-time password. Being an Amazon employee, I will click this option. All right, and then once we get to our team dashboard, you'll see options for survey, set team name, AWS console, and SSH key. We'll only need the AWS console for this workshop. We'll click AWS console, and then under login link, we'll click open console. One thing to note is if you are already signed into AWS, maybe you were doing some work earlier, you might need to log out of that account. Otherwise, it will prompt you to log out. So keep that in mind as you pull this up. All right, now that we're in the console, we'll go ahead and get started. We've already gone through the overview, so I'll click next. I'll try not to read through the entirety of the guide, right? There's a bunch of words in here that describe scenarios and the architecture and what we're doing in this workshop. If others want to read, I will be a little quiet, but I'll try and describe some important aspects as we go through this and make sure everyone is kind of understanding and all on the same page. So just to confirm, you should be in US East 1 for this workshop. And we'll go ahead and click next. There is instructions on logging into using AWS Event Engine, and that is what I went through just a minute ago. So if you need a little bit more help on that, this will walk you through there. All right, so now we're gonna begin the Security Hub walkthrough. The first module is, I'll probably be quieter more of that time. This is really for everyone to poke around the Security Hub console, become familiar with some of the different links and what's on there. I'll point out a couple things as we go through that, but for you to familiarize yourself. Do note that if you do not see a security score on the summary page, that's okay. It can take some time for the checks to run in the environment. There is, for example, in the AWS Foundational Security Best Practices, over 175 checks that are possible. So it can take some time for those to run, and it's also based on different configuration changes for others. So it might not be there yet, and it's okay if it's not. Okay, I think it is worth signing into going over how to sign into the console again. So let me exit the event and then sign back into the console. So whenever you go to the event engine page, you should get a page that looks like this, where we need to enter the event hash into the blank bar here. So I have copy and pasted the event hash from the chat. And now you can see that the accept terms and login is a bright green. So I'll go ahead and accept terms and login. Once you accept those terms and login, you'll be on the team dashboard page. So you can see survey, set team name, AWS console, and SSH key. For this, we're going to use the AWS console button. And then you'll receive a pop-up that's titled AWS console login. There is a section right underneath the red lettering that says login link. And then you can see open console, copy login link. We're going to use the open console button. So I will click the open console button, which will bring us to the AWS console. Yeah, and another good point to make is this event hash will be, this will last for, I believe, 5 hours. So if, for example, you need a little bit of extra time when we're done with this webinar, you'll have a couple of extra hours to finish this once we get done, or a few extra hours. So do keep that in mind as we go through this. This account will stay active for that amount of time. All right. Now that we're in the console, one thing to keep in mind too is if you need further help with getting into the console, you can see that under the introduction section and in the log into AWS Event Engine link on the guide. So you can see that right there. So I'll start back over from scratch into the module 1 of the Security Hub walkthrough. First off, we will search for Security Hub. So I'll type in Security Hub at the top. Then I will click on the Security Hub link under Services. Once again, if you don't see a security score just yet, that's perfectly fine. It will take some time, dependent on the amount of checks that get run in an environment. I'm going to organize my tabs a little bit. So we're on the summary page. You can see here that Security Hub is already ingesting inspector, config, guard duty findings, as well as the security checks directly from Security Hub. AWS security services are integrated with Security Hub by default. So there's no integration work on the behalf of you all as the customers. So for Security Hub integrations, one thing to keep in mind is that for AWS services, the integration is on by default. You have the option to disable depending on the integration. For third parties or partner integrations, the integrations link in the console, which we'll look at in a second, shows the instructions to integrate with that partner. And then it is up to you as the customer to set up the third-party integrations. But the AWS native services are on by default. So we'll go to integrations on the left side of the screen. We can see some of the integrations with Audit Manager and config. We can stop accepting findings if we wanted to for some reason, as well as some of the other AWS native services like Firewall Manager and Amazon Guard Duty as well. We'll come up to the top where there is the ability to filter integrations and search for integrations. There's currently over 75 different integrations with Security Hub, and that number is always going up. We'll search for Cloud Custodian. Yeah, so I believe somebody had a question for what's the use of finding JSON. So what is that? We'll see that a little bit more when we go into looking at the specific findings. We'll look at that more when we go into the security findings, but essentially all the findings that get sent to Security Hub have a standard finding format, which is called the Amazon Security Finding Format, or ASFF. This is a way that to standardize the Security Hub log findings. And essentially, this can help with when you're parsing this to either create automatic remediation, or if, say, for example, you're sending this downstream to some sort of SIEM solution, you would then have the same format across all of the findings that you've integrated with Security Hub and you're using as that central aggregation point, and will very much help with parsing. If you've ever worked with parsing out different log sources from various places previously. So we can see here for Cloud Custodian, the integration. And if we follow this link, we can go see how to configure that third-party integration. So for this, we'll actually click Accept Findings, and then we can see what is needed from a resource permission standpoint. So once we click Accept Findings, this will actually put in a policy that will allow Security Hub to accept the findings. The configuration still needs to be done on the third-party partner side, or the integration with Cloud Custodian. But now Security Hub does have the ability to ingest these findings. So now we'll jump into those findings that we talked about a second ago. So on the left side of the screen in the Security Hub console under Insights, you will see findings, a link to the findings. If we select that, we can now pull up the findings that we've ingested into our environment so far. All right. So one thing to keep in mind is in the default view, you are going to see all of the findings that have been ingested into Security Hub. If you need to look for something very specific, you can narrow this down using search criteria in the filter tab. So for this first scenario, we're going to use the search bar, and we're going to select a filter field of severity level, a filter match type of is, and a search value medium. And keep in mind, there's a little disclaimer here. Search value must be all capitalized. So I will go back to the Security Hub console. I will add a filter for severity level. Severity label, I'm sorry. And is medium. Once again, all capitalized. And then I will click Apply. And now we can see on the severity section on the left side of the screen, we have findings that are associated only with medium severity level. So if we scroll down, we can see that those are all medium. So if we click on one of these titles, we can see a lot more information around the finding. We can see resources, remediation information, finding provider details, and then also to the point of the Amazon security finding format, if you wanted to see what that looked like, the JSON finding, you could select the finding ID link at the top of this, which will pull up that finding JSON that we discussed a minute ago. And you can see all of the fields that you potentially might want to parse out or create some automatic remediation for, or gather some information from. So step number 5, we'll click the details pane next to the resources on the bottom right, which we've already opened up. So we'll click on the plus sign to the right of the findings resource type. For example, the AWS EC2 instance. This will add a resource filter to the search. So if we now want to look at the severity label, ones with severity label of a medium, and then the resource type of AWS EC2 instance, now we can click this little plus sign, and you can see that we have a new filter. The resource type is AWS EC2 instance, and it has automatically rerun our search. Number 7 is looking at the finding details or the finding JSON, which we've already gone through, so I'm not going to pull that up again. So the next section is moving on to insights. An insight is a collection of related findings defined by an aggregation statement and optional filters. So a common scenario that customers use insights for is to maybe see a trend of findings over a 90-day period. So potentially the amount of inspector findings related to a certain vulnerability, you would want to see that trend going down over time. You could use insights to visualize the findings from those types of vulnerabilities that were ingested over time. So we'll click on Insights on the left side of the screen. So right above the findings link on the left side of the screen, we see Insights. We'll go ahead and click that. We're going to add a filter for severity in Insights. So we'll go severity. Then we can see severity by counts of findings pulled up. So we will actually click on the number 24, severity by counts of findings. And now we can see this, insight. So we'll select a severity label. For example, we'll use critical in our example as well too, to see the underlying findings. So if we look at critical, if we look at our insight, we can see that there's different severity labels. We'll click on critical, where we can actually see the findings associated with that individual insight, just like we were looking at the findings on the last page. This is just giving us a little bit more narrowed down from the visualization that gets created from the insight. So next, we'll jump into security standards. There are currently 3 security standards supported by Security Hub. The first is the CIS AWS Foundations version 1.2, AWS Foundational Security Best Practices, and then PCI DSS version 3.2.1. So if you click on this link, you can see more information and a list of the security checks for each security standard. So for our next step here, we'll click security standards on the left side of the screen. So right above insights where we just were, we'll click security standards. Once again, if you don't have a score, that's completely fine. We'll click on the view results for the CIS AWS Foundations benchmark. So you can see this link is clickable, or we can click view results in the right bottom right column of the standard. Next, we'll filter these checks on 4.1. So I'll type in the box 4.1 and we can see IB CIS 4.1. So I'll click that. So next we want to click on the title of this check to get the full view of all the resources evaluated for this particular control, and then the current status of each. So we'll go back to the console. I'll select the title. We can see here that these were last updated a couple hours ago. We can see the resource associated with this. We can see the compliance status. So did it adhere to the check? The check being ensure no security groups allows ingress from 0.0.0.0/0, so the entirety of the internet, to port 22, which is an SSH port, would not be a recommendation to open SSH open to the world. So we can see which resources do comply with this, and we can see which resources don't comply with this. So let's jump back now. If we see at the top of the page, we can see the remediation instructions in the description, so that we can open this link in a new tab and go look at the types of remediation that would be needed for this. To keep in mind, there's remediation instructions for the other standards as well. So it's saying, if we scroll down, we can notice failed and past status for those resources. Another piece that we can point out here is if we look at this, we can see investigate. So we can go look at the configuration timeline and the config rule that's behind this security check. AWS Security Hub is using AWS config in the background to run these config rules, as well as keep track of a configuration timeline. That configuration timeline will help you understand when was this changed, what was the resource configuration before the change, and then now after the change. So it gives you a more timeline context of the configuration of any resource, whether that's in a past or failed compliance state. So last, Security Hub provides usage information for an AWS account. If you're not currently using Security Hub today, Security Hub does offer a 30-day free trial for each account that's part of an organization. So during the free trial, this does provide an estimate of what the spend would be This helps you kind of understand what the cost would be in an individual account or in your organization as a whole. Beyond that, what would be beyond the 30-day free trial, to understand what might be the cost implications of turning on Security Hub, or having Security Hub on full time in your environment. So we'll go back to the Security Hub console. On the left side of the screen, we'll select Settings. And then once we're in Settings, we can see Accounts, Regions, Custom Actions, and Usage. We'll select Usage. And then we can see our estimated monthly cost based on the amount of findings and security checks in this account. And then we have some context on the right side of the screen that says how Security Hub is priced. So I believe there was a question for are the config rules that are set up by default using the CIS and the AWS Foundations check standards included in the price estimate page for Security Hub, or those config rules separate new cost? So the config rules that are enabled by Security Hub are priced in Security Hub through the security checks price line that you see here, and not priced again in config. So they are priced directly through Security Hub and these security standards, usage type security checks. So that is where you'll see the cost for running of those config rules. The second piece of pricing information is for finding ingestion. And you can see here, it's based on the amount of findings per month. And then you can see the items that you've currently ingested versus your estimated monthly items. And then that estimated monthly cost down here at the bottom. All right, so now that we've explored Security Hub's capabilities, we're going to proceed to the next module. So in this module, we're going to create a custom insight for non-compliant resources. So we know what custom insights, we briefly looked at custom insights before. So now we're going to actually go build one hands-on. So what we're going to specifically do in this section is create a new config rule, and then we'll create a custom insight to give more visibility around the findings generated from that config rule. The config rule we're going to set up is CloudTrail encryption enabled. So this rule checks if CloudTrail is configured to use server-side encryption, AWS KMS encryption. The rule is going to be compliant if the KMS key ID is defined for that trail. So then we'll create an insight and track and visualize which resources our environment are failing the most config rules for that. All right, so we'll go back to the AWS console. In the search bar at the box, I'm going to type in config. You'll see under services, the first one at the top should be config, and I'll select that to go to the config console. While that's loading, I'll go back and look at the next instructions. So we need to select rules in the left navigation. Do not select the rules link under aggregators. Just select the rules link under dashboard and conformance packs at the top. Go back. Click on the add rule button in the config console. You can see this on the right side of the screen. It's in orange. So click add rule. So on the specify rule type page, we'll search for CloudTrail encryption enabled and then click next. So I'll go back for under find rule. I'll type in CloudTrail encryption. I needed to do cloud-trail encryption. So when I'm searching for the AWS managed rules after selecting add rule, I do cloud-trail ENC, and you can finish encryption, but ENC, now you'll see the CloudTrail encryption enabled rule there. So we'll click the little radio button on the left side of the rule, and then we'll click next at the bottom right. We'll go back to our instructions. On the configure rule page, we'll leave all the default options and click next. So on this configure rule page, all of these default options are fine. So we'll scroll all the way down and we'll see an orange next button at the bottom right of the page that we'll select. On the review and create page, we'll click add rule. So on this review and create page, we'll scroll down, click add rule. So let's go find our new rule. Just a tip, this little gearbox under, or gear icon under add rule, if you select that, you can make the page size bigger from 10 rules to 50 rules, and then click confirm. This will make it easier to search through and find the rule that we just created. So my rule is right here. I can see cloud-trail encryption enabled. So I'll select that. And we can see that we have a resource in scope. It's giving us the ARN of our resource. What is the resource type? And then the compliance state. So this is actually non-compliant with our rule. That's looking for SSE KMS keys. So we'll go back to our instructions. If you don't see any resources listed under resources in scope, wait a couple minutes for the rule to evaluate. You may need to refresh the page to see the results. So once you see a non-compliant resource, you're ready to continue on to the next step. So now we're going to go back to the Security Hub console. So once again, I am going to go to the search box at the top, and then I'm going to type in Security Hub, which will pull up Security Hub under services. So I'll go ahead and select that. Once we're on the Security Hub summary page, we'll select integrations on the left side of the screen. and we'll scroll down to see that AWS config integration should show a status of accepting findings. And you'll see that right next to accepting findings, there is a see findings link that we'll select. And we can see here that there's 5 findings associated with config. Go back to our instructions. So make sure that we see the finding from the config rule that we just created. Make a note of the filters being used to display this page. We'll need them in the next part. So I actually do not see that. So I'm going to refresh. Yeah, so I did not see that immediately, but I went ahead and refreshed, and now I do see it. It's the top one. CloudTrail encryption enabled. You can see that. We'll take note of our filters. Our product name is config. Workflow status is new. Workflow status is notified. Record state is active. So there's 4 filters that got us to this config only search. So now we're going to create a custom insight. So we'll once again, go back to the console and go to the insights page on the left side of the screen, or the link on the left side of the screen. Back to our instructions. So we're going to click create insight, and then we're going to put in the filters that we took note of in step 11. So 3 of these are already pre-populated. We'll add a filter for product name. So I'll type in product. We can see product name, so I'll select that. Is by default selected. And then I'll type in config. This is by default with a capital C, and capitals do matter. So make sure that you have config with a capital C. Click apply. And we can see the finding from the rule that we just created, as well as 5 other findings from config. So we're going to add one more filter for where compliance status is failed. So I'm going to type in compliance, and we can see filters compliance status. So I'll select that. Is failed. Once again, capitals do matter. This is all capitalized. Then I will select apply. And we can see that we have 2 rules where the compliance status is failed. The rule that we just created, as well as another. We're going to give our insight the name config evaluation results. And then we're going to click create insight. So I'll go back to the console. So I missed a step on step 16. I apologize for that. So we need to choose a group by. So in this list of options, we'll choose resource ID. So I'll go back to the console. We'll select group by. And then I will scroll down to resource ID. I'll select apply. And then now that we have the group by, you can see in the top right, our box to create an insight is available. So we'll select create insight. And then I will paste the config evaluation results name that I copied from the other page. And then I'll click create insight. So now we can refresh our browser to reload the screens to where we now should have graphs associated with this. So we can see graphs associated with severity level, AWS account, resource type, resource ID, as well as product name, which these can be altered based on the filters that we were using for that custom insight. All right, so now we have a custom insight that gives us a little bit more visibility into findings in a certain area. So you can certainly play with these different findings and these different filters to visualize these findings better, and either grouping them in certain areas or getting those graph visualizations based on those custom insights. So with that, we'll move on and move on to module number 3. So if you notice from some of the, and I'll go back just one. If you notice as you go through this too, there'll be feedback as well too, for a couple things from, say, for example, if you, this feedback down here at the bottom, if you have time, you have the opportunity to go back to config, maybe set up some more rules, and create other custom insights. So like we said earlier, this workshop is going to be, you'll have access to this account for a couple of hours after this webinar ends. And if you have time at that time, I would encourage you to continue to look at this and continue to play with it and become more comfortable. All right, and I'll give folks a few more minutes to kind of close out this section before we move on to the next. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next section. But before I do, just do keep in mind that this is a public workshop from a workshop guide. So if you want to go back and look at any of this later and kind of dig into the information on this as well, that link is public. So you'll have the opportunity to do so then as well too. So module 3, remediation and response via CIS benchmark and a custom action. So now we're going to go into a little bit more deeper dive on what we can do with some of these findings, after they come into our environment from an automated response standpoint. So, some of the things that we're going to use during this is a Lambda function that's already deployed that's going to isolate an EC2 instance from the VPC that it sits in. All right. So we'll go ahead and get started. So there is a quick start solution called the Security Hub Automated Response and Remediation Solution. Essentially what this is it provides response and remediation actions based on these compliance standards and best practices for those misconfigurations. You have the ability to deploy this based off of deploy this quick start guide that will quickly ramp up any environment with a set of automated remediations that can be used or not used, depending on disabling and enabling event engine or event bridge rules. But this can very quickly get you all started on your path to automated response or remediation without needing to manually go create a bunch of new automatic remediation rules and Lambda functions. This gives you a great baseline to get started, and then a potentially starting off point to go build on top of this. So in this, we're going to deploy the Security Hub automated remediation and response playbooks via CloudFormation. So under this section, so we're going to the first step will be to deploy the admin stack by clicking the deploy char admin stack button below. So this template's going to launch into US East 1 by default. So now that this pulls up, you should see that we're in CloudFormation stacks, create stack. You can see that right at the top. There's going to be a title that says quick create stack. So we will review the stack name and parameters for the template. The parameters are pre-populated to deploy all current runbooks for char. So we can go ahead and just scroll to the bottom of the quick create stack screen and check the box that's acknowledging that we might that this CloudFormation template is going to create IAM resources. So I'm going to go back to the CloudFormation screen. I'm going to go to the bottom. I'm going to say I acknowledge that this stack is going to create IAM resources. I also acknowledge that it might require the following capability, which is to auto expand, which means there might be that there's other stacks that are going to be launched from this individual stack. So I'll check those two checkboxes, and then I'll click on the orange create stack button in the bottom right. Now you'll see create in progress. If we refresh this, we can see the events once they start happening. So keep in mind, you do not need to wait for the stack to complete before advancing to the next step. Creation of the core stack will take approximately 8 minutes to run. So next, we need to deploy the member role stacks. So once again, under step 4, we will click the button that says deploy char member role stacks. For cleanliness of this, I'm going to go ahead and exit out of my other Chrome tabs just to make this a little bit more clear. So Step 5, review the stack name and parameters for the template. For the Sec Hub admin account parameter, fill in the account ID of the account you're working in. So I'm going to go back to the console. We need to go under parameters, and we see that admin account ID is blank. To get the account ID of the account that you're working in the top right corner, you can see this that says team role, master key, at, and then a number. That number is the account ID. If you select that dropdown, you'll see a little box next to the account ID. If you select that box, it will copy the account ID to your clipboard. You can also highlight this and copy and paste as well. But in the top right, you can hit that drop down, click that box to copy the account ID. So now that I have my account ID copied, I'm going to click back on the parameters box. And now that I have put my account ID into that admin account number box under parameters, I can scroll all the way to the bottom if you're not already and select the checkbox next to I acknowledge that CloudFormation might create IAM resources with custom names. So I will select my checkbox, and then then you'll see the create stack in the bottom right, and I'll select create stack. And we'll go back to our instructions. So we just completed step number 6. Moving on to step number 7, we need to deploy one more CloudFormation template. And we'll do this by clicking the deploy shard member runbooks stack button below, just like we've done the last 2. So on step 7, I'm going to select that. Once again, I'm going to click out of the old CloudFormation tab that I don't need anymore. We'll go back to our instructions and see if there's any specific steps from the parameters. So review the stack name and parameters for the template. For the Sec Hub admin account parameter fill in the account ID. So I believe there's a question for, can this SHAR or Security Hub automated response and remediation solution be deployed to Control Tower CFCT pipeline and manage member accounts? I am not sure of the answer to the involvement with Control Tower, but this can be a multi-account solution across an organization. And that is the reason for the member role stacks and member runbook stacks. There are the ability to do this across accounts. So for step number 8, we once again need to go back to the CloudFormation console where we launched our stack. And if we scroll down under parameters, we can see once again there is a Security Hub admin account number that is needed with a blank box. So once again, we will go to the top right. We'll click the drop down, and we'll copy our account ID. So I'm going to click that little box to copy my account ID to clipboard, and then I'll go back under parameters in the admin account ID, and I will paste in the account number to the account that I'm using. So I'll scroll all the way to the bottom after this, and once again, we have 2 different checkboxes that we need to check before we click Create Stack. So we acknowledge that CloudFormation might create IAM resources with custom names. We also acknowledge that CloudFormation might require the following capability, which is the auto expand capability. So I I'm going to click those two checkboxes, and then if you're not already scrolled to the bottom, you'll see this Create Stack button. I will select Create Stack. Go back to our instructions. So creation of both member stacks will take approximately 5 minutes to run. The member runbook stack will also submit multiple nested template stacks to create all the necessary resources. So we can go ahead and proceed to the next section while these stacks are creating. And we can create, or we can perform the steps in the next section without needing these stacks to be finished. I believe there's another question of, can this be deployed via Terraform? So there are Terraform resources for the underlying resources that are created for this SHAR solution. So that being Lambda functions, event bridge rules, and custom actions. There is not a Terraform solution out there today. But could it be deployed via Terraform? Yes, it would require writing that. So if you need to, there is the ability to suppress findings or to archive Security Hub findings. There's also the ability to automatically resolve findings through a link that was just shared. There's also the ability to disable security checks underneath a security standard if you need to. If that isn't relevant to your environment for whatever reason, you do have the ability to do that. All right, so we're going to create a custom action in Security Hub now. So this section will walk through creating a custom action, which will trigger an event bridge rule. In this scenario, the event bridge rule will invoke a Lambda function to change the security group on an EC2 instance that is associated with a Security Hub finding. So the first step there is we need to create a custom action in Security Hub. So I will go back to the CloudFormation tab that I had pulled open. I'm going to go to the top of the search box, and I'm going to click Security Hub, or type in Security Hub, and then go to the Security Hub console. I'll go back to the instructions. In the left navigation panes, we're going to choose Settings, and then we're going to choose the Custom Actions tab. So we'll go back to Security Hub. So there was a question about, is there any plan for Jira integration for the SHAR solution? So there is a Jira integration with AWS Security Hub. So when those findings are ingested into Security Hub, you can have an integration that creates a ticket in Jira, and then simultaneously the SHAR solution you would be taking advantage of that automated remediation and response, and then it would have the ability to take care of the security misconfiguration at the same time that the integration with Jira could create ticketing, as well as I believe that is a two-way integration. So once the finding gets resolved in AWS or in Security Hub, resolving that in Jira, and that way you would have the history of a ticket, but it would be created and resolved based on the SHAR solution remediating the security check. Great question, by the way. So now that we're back on the Security Hub page, we will go to Settings. And we will go to the Custom Actions tab, so Accounts, Regions, and Custom Actions. And then on the right side of the screen, you can see the Create with Custom Action button. So we'll select Create Custom Action. So we're going to enter an action name, action description, and action ID that's representative of an action that would isolate an EC2 instance. So I'm going to I'll keep it the same that we see it on the guide. Isolate instance. And then the description is isolate. You don't necessarily need to give it such a long description for this workshop. Obviously, it'd be recommended to do that in a production environment, but don't necessarily need to do that for time's sake here. And then we'll put in a unique ID. You can't, no special characters are allowed in the custom action ID, so no space on that. I'm going to name mine isolate instance. Once again, no space. And then I will click create custom action, orange box at the bottom right. All right, then we'll go back to our instructions. So we'll now copy the custom ARN that was generated for our custom finding. And you can, once we're back on the console, we can see the custom action ARN. So we'll copy that. I will highlight that and click Command C. Go back to our instructions. Now we need to go create an Amazon Event Bridge rule to capture this custom action. So in this section, we'll define an Event Bridge rule that will match event findings coming from Security Hub, which were forwarded to the custom action. So we'll go back and then we'll navigate to Event Bridge. So I'll come to the top search bar, click Event Bridge. So we'll go to Event Bridge. We'll click on the create. So there was a question about if I suppress findings, will it increase my security score? No, because that is it's in the finding section and not necessarily a resource that's passed or not passed the security check. That's more of a catching in that downstream. The only way to affect the security score would be to either enabling or disabling checks. So I'm going to keep moving so I can make sure to get through this third module. Keep in mind, you do have a couple more hours. So we'll leave the fourth module will kind of be a self-paced after this webinar, but we'll try and make it through the third module together as we go through this. So I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit just to make everybody aware. So I'm going to click Create Rule. And then we're going to define rule details. We'll label this isolate instance rule. Isolate instance rule. We'll leave the description off as of now. And then we will use the rule type of a rule with an event pattern, and we'll go ahead and click next. All right, on the AWS, let me see again. Whoops, didn't scroll down far enough. So on the event pattern, we'll leave it as AWS services. We'll type in Security Hub. We'll select an event type, which is custom action. And then we'll specify the custom action arm. So we'll click this radio button and we'll paste in the custom action arm that we copied before. So once we do that, we will select next. And then we will select target and we'll type in Lambda. And then we'll select the isolate EC2 security group, Lambda. And then we'll go ahead and click next. And then we'll, on the configuration tags as optional, we'll leave tags off for now and we will click next. Then on review and create, we'll scroll all the way to the bottom and we'll click the create rule button. So now we'll test the response action starting from a security finding from an EC2 instance. So let's navigate to the security dashboard and we'll go to findings. So once again, at the top, we'll type in Security Hub. We'll select the Security Hub service. We'll go to findings on the left side. Once we're on the findings, we will filter by resource type is, and I'll go ahead and copy this so I don't mess this up. But we'll do resource type is AWS EC2 instance, and we'll click apply. So we'll click on the title of any of them where the resource is EC2 instance. So we'll do this outbound port scan. We'll expand the resources section of the finding. So if we scroll down here, we can see resources. So we'll click the blue link for the EC2 instance under the resource ID. So we can see under resource ID, we have a blue link. We'll go ahead and click that. Go back to our instructions. So we'll click on the instance record and then click security tab and record the name of the current security group. Click on the instance, we'll click on the security tab, and then we'll click, we'll copy security group ID right here. So we'll go back to Security Hub tab in our browser and we'll click the checkbox to the left of our finding. I'm going to close, or I'll leave that open. In the drop-down actions, we can select isolate instance. So we successfully sent findings to Amazon CloudWatch events. We can see that our security group was the default security group currently. So if we go back to the EC2 browser and refresh the tab, we can verify that the security group on the instance has been changed to the security team security group. Oh, let me go back to the instance. I'm going to refresh. And then I'll select the instance. I'll go to the security tab. And now we can see that our security group says security team security group. So now we've sent that, we've created a custom action that was accepted by the custom or the event bridge rule. And then the target of that event bridge rule was that Lambda function that went and isolated an instance. So you can go into the Lambda console and look at the different Lambda functions that were created as part of the SHAR solution if you're interested in learning more about what is on that. For this webinar, I know that we are running short on time, so I want to encourage you all to continue to finish this lab and work through this, as you still have a couple hours of this account to be able to work through this. Look at the event bridge rules, look at the Lambda functions that were created, and continue to kind of immerse yourself in Security Hub and some of these different findings. But with that, I will leave you with essentially the polls on the screen and ask if there's any final questions before we wrap up.